Picture this. You're 16, juggling high school homework with a side gig cleaning carpets in sunny Los Angeles. While your friends are worried about prom or getting their first car, you're thinking about business plans and profit margins. Sounds ambitious, right? Well, that's exactly where Barry Minkow found himself in the early 1980s. A teenage kid with massive dreams, a charming smile, and a dangerously creative imagination. Barry wasn't born into money, and neither were his parents. He grew up in the San Fernando Valley, not exactly the land of billionaires. But he did grow up with something almost as powerful, a relentless drive to be somebody. He'd watch people in suits driving shiny cars, holding meetings, making deals, and he thought, why not me? So he took action. With a tiny carpet cleaning machine borrowed from his mom and a head full of dreams, he started his own company. He called it ZZZ's Best. Yep, 4 Z's. Because even back then, Barry knew branding mattered. It sounded quirky, confident, and memorable. Exactly what he needed. At first glance, the business was nothing fancy. Carpets, cleaning chemicals, door-to-door hustling, the kind of work that barely pays the bills. But for Barry, this wasn't just a job. It was a stage. Every interaction was a pitch. Every client a new audience to impress. He would show up wearing a tie, promising professional service with teenage enthusiasm. And people loved that energy. Before long, he started hiring friends from school, turning his small gig into something that looked bigger than it really was. He wasn't just cleaning floors anymore. He was building a brand. Here's where it gets interesting. Barry quickly learned that business isn't only about doing the work, it's about how others perceive you're doing it. Reputation, image, presentation, that's what moves money. So he leaned into it. He convinced suppliers to give him credit, told customers he had major contracts lined up, and promised investors that ZZZ's Best was growing faster than anyone could imagine. But spoiler alert, it wasn't. Most of those big contracts only existed in his head. Imagine being 16 and realizing you can bend reality just a little bit. That people believe what you tell them if you sound confident enough. Dangerous lesson, right? But Barry soaked it in. Every white lie that helped close a deal made him bolder. Every fabricated number that impressed a banker fed his ego. And as long as money kept coming in and nobody asked too many questions, the illusion worked perfectly. After all, who would suspect a kid in high school of masterminding anything shady? By 17, Barry was driving a red Ferrari. Not borrowed, not rented, his. Well, technically financed, but you get the picture. He loved flaunting success, projecting wealth even when the books didn't back it up. Local TV stations adored him. The teenage entrepreneur changing the game, they called him. Newspapers wrote glowing profiles of the self-made genius who was supposedly revolutionizing the cleaning industry. ZZ Best looked unstoppable, and people ate it up because everyone loves a good American dream story. Let's pause here for a second. Think about how easy it is to sell success today. Fancy cars, great logo, catchy pitch, same formula Barry used decades ago. The difference? Back then, there was no social media to fact-check anything. If you appeared successful, people assumed you were. The illusion was everything. Barry understood that better than anyone his age. And that's how he started playing the long game. A game built on bold claims, fake documents, and genuine charm. Now, the actual service, the carpet cleaning, still existed, at least on paper. Teams were out there doing real jobs. But the profits from actual cleaning? Tiny. That wasn't the part that made Barry tick. What excited him were the big numbers, the kind that made banks line up to lend money. So he got creative. He forged documents showing large restoration projects, Insurance claims after water damage, building cleanups, stuff that sounded legitimate but never happened. Each fake contract turned into loans, investments, or headlines celebrating his genius. That's how ZZZZ quietly became a make-believe empire. So how does a teenage kid pull this off without getting caught? Well, that's where charisma goes a long way. Barry could talk circles around seasoned executives. He had that disarming combination of innocence and confidence that made adults underestimate him. You'd think, he's young, but wow, so driven. And that's exactly what Barry wanted you to think. People saw a wunderkind. He saw a system begging to be fooled. Every step of the way, Barry sold an image more than a product. He hired people to pose as clients when auditors visited. He set up fake offices to look like major operation hubs. He even made fake documents appear real enough to withstand a basic review. And the craziest part? For a while, it all worked. Banks poured money in, suppliers extended credit, and investors couldn't wait to jump on board. It was the perfect storm. A confident young founder, a booming business, and a public desperate to believe in the next big American success story. Of course, the higher you climb, the harder you fall. And Barry's climb was meteoric. Within a few short years, he went from mopping floors to rubbing elbows with millionaires. But fame comes with expectations. You can't just maintain the illusion forever. Every new lie had to be covered by a bigger one. Every missing dollar had to be replaced by more borrowed money. The game became a monster of its own, demanding constant feeding. And Barry, still barely an adult, thought he could handle it. Let's be clear here. ZZ's best wasn't some complicated financial scheme run by a team of analysts. It was basically smoke and mirrors with a dash of teenage arrogance. Yet somehow it fooled accountants, banks, and even Wall Street analysts later on. It says a lot about the era. People wanted to believe. America in the 80s was obsessed with financial success. If you were young and rich, you weren't questioned, you were celebrated. So when Barry strutted in front of a camera talking about his revolutionary cleaning methods or his national expansion plans, nobody doubted him. Why would they? The kid had a Ferrari, an office full of employees, and glowing press coverage. It all looked legit. But truthfully, behind that shiny surface, Barry was drowning in lies he created himself. And the deeper he went, the less chance he had of pulling out. Now, to put this in perspective, think of it like building a castle on sand. At first it looks perfect. Everyone claps. But the tide's coming, and the foundation, completely unstable. Barry's entire fortune depended on keeping everyone, investors, employees, journalists, excited enough not to look too closely. The second anyone did, the whole story would fall apart. Yet that's what made the game thrilling for him. The risk wasn't just financial, it was personal, almost addictive. The irony is that Barry genuinely believed he could make the fake success real someday. That if he played his cards right long enough, the company's actual growth would catch up to the fantasy. It's a dangerous mindset, thinking you can cheat your way to legitimacy. But that's what made Barry such a complex character. He wasn't just a con artist, he was a dreamer who refused to wake up. And as long as investors kept believing, he kept performing. By the time Barry hit 20, ZZ Best had grown beyond anyone's imagination. In his mind, he'd already made it. He spoke like a CEO, dressed like a movie star, and moved through life like someone untouchable. But in reality, every step forward made his situation more fragile. The company books were a mess. The fake projects stacked higher than ever. And the truth, that this multi-million-dollar empire was built on pure fiction, could surface at any moment. Still, Barry had no plan to slow down. Why would he? Success had become his entire identity. If you think about it, Barry's early story isn't just a tale of greed. It's a mirror of modern ambition gone too far. The need to be someone, to appear successful before actually being successful. That mindset isn't rare today. Whether it's influencers faking luxury lifestyles or startups exaggerating growth, it's all the same playbook. Barry just happened to do it before everyone else. He was ahead of his time, for all the wrong reasons. So, where does that leave us? We've got a high school dropout running what looks like a thriving company, fake contracts piling up, investors swooning, and the media cheering him on. It's the perfect Hollywood setup. A golden boy rising fast with no idea of the free fall waiting just around the corner. The question is, how far can a lie like that go before it explodes? Well, you're about to find out, because ZZ's best was only getting started. And the next chapter? That's when the illusion becomes an empire. Okay, now that you know how a high school kid turned a carpet cleaning hobby into a business, let's get into how he built a $100 million mirage. Because this, right here, is where Barry Minkow goes from local prodigy to professional illusionist. And the wild part? He didn't pull rabbits out of hats. He pulled fake contracts out of filing cabinets. You're about to see how a teenager created an empire that never really existed, but everyone swore was real. By the early 1980s, Z's Best looked like the definition of success. It had employees, trucks, and invoices stacked like a real corporation. But there was a problem. The revenue wasn't matching the image. Carpet cleaning can only take you so far, and Barry had a taste for things that shined far beyond vacuum hoses. He wanted expansion, investors, prestige, the whole package. So he decided to fake it until he made it. Only problem being, he never intended to stop faking it. Let's break it down. Barry realized that true money wasn't hidden in the daily grind of cleaning carpets. It was in big contracts, like restoring office buildings after floods or fires, the so-called insurance restoration business. These jobs paid hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions, at least on paper. So he started creating those paper jobs. Fake clients, fake addresses, fake contracts. He even hired fake subcontractors to make it look legit. Every piece of paper looked polished, official, and ready for the eyes of any banker who wanted proof of ZZ's Best's booming success. Whenever investors asked for evidence of his big restoration projects, Barry's team went above and beyond to make them believe. He'd rent buildings, slap ZZ's Best signs on the windows, and show visitors around like they were touring an active site. Sometimes he'd even hire actors to pose as construction workers. Imagine walking into a completely staged scene with machinery humming, workers moving around, and Barry charmingly pointing at blueprints. You'd believe it too. What's wild is how simple the deception was. This wasn't Silicon Valley tech-level trickery. It was theater. Barry created a reality show before reality shows existed. Every lie was rehearsed, every illusion carefully placed where the right people would see it. He once said perception was everything, and in the world of finance, he wasn't wrong. Investors don't always invest in performance. They invest in confidence. Barry gave them both, in spades. But here's the thing about creating fake revenue. You still need real cash to support the illusion. You can't pay employees or rent fake buildings on promises alone. So Barry built a financial house of cards relying on loans, investor funds, and personal charm. The more money he borrowed, the bigger he could make the show look. And the bigger the show looked, the more money came in. It was a looping cycle of illusion, the same model that giant Ponzi schemes would later perfect. Every fraud needs a believable backbone, some small bit of truth wrapped in grand lies. For Barry, the truth was that ZZZ's Best really did clean carpets. There were real employees, real vans, real invoices, just not enough of them to justify the million-dollar deals he was bragging about. That touch of reality made the scam invisible. Even auditors reviewing ZZZ's Best's files saw authentic records at the base, never realizing the upper half was fiction. And trust me, Barry knew exactly how to blur that line. He learned how to forge documents so well that even seasoned accountants couldn't tell the difference. He'd duplicate insurance company letterheads, mimic signatures, and fabricate entire chains of communication between non-existent clients and his office. To outsiders, it looked airtight. To insiders, especially those who helped him, it was a mix of fear, admiration, and disbelief. Everyone close to Barry knew he was operating in a gray zone, but nobody dared call him out. After all, the money looked real, the checks cleared, and the media kept praising him. At this stage, ZZZ Best wasn't just a company anymore. It was a performance, a system of mutual deception where everyone, employees, investors, and even Barry himself, played a part. It raises a question you've probably thought before. How do smart adults fall for something so obviously fake? The answer is psychology. People see what they want to see. When someone like Barry radiates confidence and success, questioning him feels like doubting the very system that praises ambition. And in the 80s, that system glorified risk-takers. Remember, America was obsessed with young millionaires back then. Stock markets were booming. Credit was easy, and Reaganomics painted entrepreneurship as the new religion. So when a guy barely out of high school turned a service company into a national sensation, people didn't just believe it, they wanted to believe it. Barry sold them the American dream in the form of mop buckets and fake paperwork. He was the poster boy for success, and no one wanted to ruin the fantasy. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, things got darker. The pressure to maintain the illusion grew unbearable. Every month required fresh contracts, new fake reports, and bigger lies to cover the last set. Barry built a network of accomplices, a handful of trusted employees who handled the paperwork, arranged the fake sites, and managed the stream of forged checks. It wasn't a single scammer. It was an orchestra. And Barry conducted every note. The scale of the fraud exploded when Barry realized he could use ZZ's Best's supposed growth to lure millions in capital investments. He boasted that his company was about to dominate the entire cleaning industry, offering investors shares in what looked like a golden opportunity. Banks wanted a piece of the action too. They lent him huge amounts, convinced the firm's financials were solid. It's almost funny. The more suspicious the numbers looked, the more people wanted in. That's how financial bubbles are born. Not through facts, but through excitement. You might be wondering, did nobody double-check anything? Not really. The auditors relied on documents that Barry's own team provided, all perfectly fabricated. When they wanted to confirm a project with an insurance company, Barry's associates redirected the calls to phones inside ZZZ Best's office. They pretended to be representatives of those companies, confirming every fake detail. It was a flawless loop, and it fooled even top-tier professionals. To put this in perspective, this wasn't just a few lies to get by. Barry's ledger eventually listed tens of millions in phantom revenue. Imagine claiming you've cleaned skyscrapers, government buildings, entire blocks of flooded real estate, all imaginary. Yet, those imaginary projects generated real loans and real investments that funded his very real luxury cars and lifestyle. It was virtual money before digital banking even existed. Barry was playing economics like a video game, except the casualties were real people. And here's the psychological twist. Barry didn't seem to feel like a con artist at this point. In his mind, he was rewriting the rules of business. If everyone else exaggerated numbers, why not him? If people believed in hype, why not sell them the ultimate version of it? The line between ambition and deception evaporated completely. That's the danger of self-delusion. When lies become your truth, you stop realizing you're lying. As his confidence grew, Barry became bolder. He bragged in interviews about how ZZ's Best was changing the cleaning industry forever. He promised technological innovations, expansion across states, and partnerships that didn't exist. It was pure storytelling mixed with swagger. The audience completely sold. Reporters loved him. Business schools cited him as a case study for youth entrepreneurship. Funny, right? A total fabrication being studied as inspiration for real business. But Barry's empire wasn't just built on lies, it was fueled by obsession. He micromanaged everything, demanding loyalty from his team like a cult leader. He told them they were part of something revolutionary, bigger than the mistakes they had to make to keep it going. To question him was to betray the dream. Slowly, the people around him stopped asking questions altogether. And that's how a fraud turns from small-time trickery into a cultural myth. The irony is that despite being surrounded by fake documents and false contracts, ZZ's Best actually started to gain a small bit of real success. Revenue from legitimate cleaning jobs went up, partially because of the publicity from the fake ones. Barry's illusion had become so big that the spotlight it attracted brought real customers. That's the great paradox of deception. Sometimes lies create the very truth they imitate. But remember, even a castle made of real bricks can't stand if its foundation is rotten. By the middle of 1986, Barry's fraud had grown to a scale no one could ignore forever. The company claimed enormous profits, and competitors began whispering doubts. Rivals wondered how a teenage-run cleaning company could outperform long-established players. Some auditors noticed tiny inconsistencies, mismatched signatures, oddly timed contracts, copy-pasted formats. Still, no one dared to sound the alarm. The myth was too beautiful to destroy. The building pressure turned Barry into something else entirely. Not just a businessman, but a full-time performer juggling debt, lies, and an ego bigger than his Ferrari. He surrounded himself with luxury, including mansions and parties that screamed excess. He was Hollywood meets Wall Street, a perfect poster child for 80s capitalism. But deep down, even he knew the game couldn't go on forever. The walls were closing in. And yet, Barry didn't stop. Like a gambler convinced the next hand would fix everything, he pushed onward, signing fake deals worth millions more, planning expansions across states, and promising future profits to keep the illusion breathing. The bigger the fraud, the smaller the margin for error. But Barry thrived on that edge. He wasn't afraid of the fall. He was addicted to the flight. So, think about it. One teenager, a printing press of lies, and a business world too dazzled to doubt him. You can already tell this won't end well. But before it all collapses, there's one final trick up his sleeve. Taking ZZ's Best to Wall Street itself. Yeah, the big leagues. Because why just fool local investors when you can fool the entire market? That's what we'll explore next, the moment Barry's imaginary empire went public. By the time Barry Minkow turned 20, he was ready for the big stage. ZZ's Best had grown beyond the local mirage it started as. Now it was time to make it sparkle under Wall Street's lights. He wanted legitimacy, not just headlines, and nothing screams legitimacy like going public. The problem: you can't take a fake company to the stock market without making some major acrobatics behind the scenes. But Barry was more than ready to perform. Think about what it takes to sell shares of a company to the public. You need audited financial statements, verified contracts, and investor confidence. You need accountants, lawyers, and underwriters nodding in agreement. In short, you need an entire system of professionals either believing in your story or looking the other way. Barry managed to get both. He convinced credible auditing firms that ZZ's Best had tens of millions in revenue from insurance restoration work that never existed. He didn't just trick investors anymore. He fooled the gatekeepers of the financial system. The trick was simple and brilliant in its audacity. Barry had created an entire infrastructure of forgery, So seamless it passed professional scrutiny. Remember those fake restoration projects from before? Now they were carefully documented with invoices, job site photos, and fake client lists. When the auditors wanted to inspect one of the sites, Barry's team staged it from scratch. They rented a building, staged workers, printed fake blueprints, and made everything look like a real operational site. The auditors saw what Barry wanted them to see, and that's all that mattered. Once the audits gave the thumbs up, Barry was untouchable. On paper, ZZZZ looked like one of the fastest growing companies in America. The numbers were insane: consistent revenue growth, expanding projects, and a young CEO whose charisma could power a small city. Wall Street loved it. Brokers couldn't wait to sell shares of this teenage wonders company. And when the stock hit the market, the demand was overwhelming. Investors wanted a piece of the American dream: bold, young, successful, unstoppable. Here's the thing. Going public is like stepping into a spotlight that never turns off. Every number, every contract, every press statement is suddenly magnified. Any inconsistency can blow the cover off a scam, but Barry wasn't scared. To him, scrutiny was just another performance to manage. He knew something fundamental about human psychology. Once people believe in a success story, they fight to protect it. The banks, the auditors, the analysts, everyone was now invested, literally and emotionally, in his success. The IPO was a success. ZZZ best stock soared. Barry's personal fortune skyrocketed on paper, and the media couldn't get enough. Television crews lined up to interview him, calling him a genius, the next Rockefeller, or the new face of American capitalism. Fast-talking, good-looking, wearing gold watches and a confident grin, Barry was Hollywood's idea of a Wall Street prodigy. He even bought a mansion with a swimming pool shaped like a dollar sign. Subtle, right? You might think someone that young, surrounded by that much attention, would start to panic. But not Barry. He fed off it. In his mind, success had finally become real because everyone around him said it was. He genuinely believed he had outsmarted the system, not cheated it. The line between fraud and entrepreneurship vanished completely. And honestly, who could tell the difference when his company was trading on the stock exchange like any other blue-chip firm? What makes this part of the story especially insane is how many gatekeepers failed to notice the obvious red flags. Think about it. A teenage CEO, a company growing faster than giants in the industry, and financial statements too good to be true. Yet nobody blinked. The auditors signed off. The banks kept lending. The regulators stayed silent. The media published glowing profiles without asking a single hard question. It was like a national trance of optimism. And here's why that happens. People want success stories. They're emotionally invested in them. Nobody wants to be the one to say, "Hey, maybe the genius kid is lying." It's uncomfortable to be the party pooper in a celebration of the American dream. So they all cheered instead. In that sense, Barry's fraud wasn't just his doing. It was a mirror reflecting a culture obsessed with image over substance. During this peak, ZZZZ wasn't just a company. It was a brand, a symbol. Barry's team attended business conventions, drove fancy cars wrapped in company logos, and sponsored charity events. It was a masterclass in perception management, and the public loved it. For every doubt whispered by a skeptical employee, there were 10 stories praising Barry's vision and hustle. It's almost poetic, a fake company earning real admiration for its fake accomplishments. Behind the scenes, though, the machine was running on fumes. To maintain the image of continuous growth, Barry had to keep fabricating new projects. The fake restoration jobs kept piling up, each one bigger than the last. The accounting acrobatics became more complex as auditors asked for deeper documentation. Barry was juggling a network of lies so large that even a small slip could destroy everything overnight. But his ego wouldn't let him stop. It's almost tragic in a way. Barry had built something entirely out of fiction, yet it had become real in the minds of those around him. When you convince Wall Street to believe in your ghost business, you've crossed into uncharted territory. It's like selling air and making everyone think it's oxygen. Even Barry might have started believing his own myth by this point. He told journalists he planned to make ZZZ's best the IBM of cleaning. Delusional? Maybe. But confidence sells, and Barry was a salesman first and foremost. The irony here is rich. Wall Street analysts spent hours dissecting financial statements created by a kid who never finished high school. They wrote glowing reports about his sound business fundamentals and efficient growth strategies. All of it based on nonsense. Even when minor discrepancies appeared, they brushed them aside as normal growing pains of a fast-developing company. Want proof of how collective denial works? That's it right there. If you pause for a second, you can almost see how this could happen even today. Replace ZZ's best with a flashy tech company promising revolutionary AI cleaning algorithms, and the story would play out the same. Investors crave stories more than numbers. They want a visionary founder, a disruptive product, and a promise of endless growth. Barry sold that dream decades before it became Silicon Valley's default business model. Only he didn't have the code or the product, just nerve. As the public offering rolled out, Barry's wealth exploded. He flaunted his success at every opportunity, partying with celebrities, showing off in magazines, and expanding his office to look more like a movie studio than a workplace. Employees were both inspired and terrified. They knew the foundation was weak, but couldn't resist the ride. Barry had become larger than life, untouchable, the living embodiment of greed's glamorous side. But no illusion lasts forever, especially when built on lies that keep multiplying. As public scrutiny intensified, maintaining his story required more precise coordination than ever. Each new lie had to perfectly align with dozens of older ones. Even the smallest accounting error risked exposure. You could feel the pressure building like steam in a sealed tank. One wrong move and the explosion would be catastrophic. Yet Barry didn't care. He felt invincible, shielded by fame and money. He kept pushing his accountants for numbers that fit his narrative, not reality. He doubled down, convincing himself and everyone around him that the company could grow into its fake success. That phrase, to grow into your lie, might as well define every economic bubble ever created. The fake becomes real until it doesn't. And then there were the auditors, still oblivious. They conducted site visits, inspected documents, and published clean reports. Some may have suspected oddities, but who wants to risk losing a high-profile client who pays well and makes headlines? Financial integrity often bends where profit begins. After all, Barry wasn't the first fraud to exploit institutional laziness, and he sure wouldn't be the last. The irony is that ZZ's best's soaring stock value made the fraud harder to spot. Because the company kept gaining credibility, it created its own defense shield. Critics seemed jealous. Skeptics were outvoted. Every red flag blended into gold confetti celebrating youth and ambition. And for a brief moment, Barry Minkow really was Wall Street's golden boy. Not because of his genius, but because of his timing. He sold a dream during an era desperate for one. By the end of 1986, Barry's empire stood at its pinnacle. The company's market value appeared massive, his personal wealth unimaginable, and his fame unmatched for someone barely old enough to order a drink. Investors lined up. The media crowned him king of adolescent entrepreneurship. But beneath that shiny exterior, cracks were starting to form. Journalists began asking more specific questions. Some clients didn't exist. Some invoices didn't match actual insurance records. The carefully built mirage was starting to flicker. And that brings us to the next turning point. Every great illusion, no matter how dazzling, eventually meets the moment when someone steps backstage and realizes the mirrors are just glass and smoke. The stage lights were still on for Barry, but behind the applause, the whispers were growing louder. People were starting to see what ZZZ's best really was. Not the future of business, but the biggest teenage con in American history. The show, as they say, was about to hit intermission, and this time the curtain wouldn't rise again. By 1987, the spotlight that once made Barry Minkow shine had started to burn. Z's best was still celebrated publicly, but behind the scenes, the empire was wobbling. Every fake contract needed maintenance. Every fictitious site required constant explanation, and Barry's elaborate performance was taking its toll. You can only juggle so many spinning plates before one drops, and when it does, everything else begins to fall. The first cracks didn't come from auditors or regulators, they came from the inside. A few employees started whispering. They noticed documents that seemed off, projects that never materialized, and numbers that didn't match the workload they were actually doing. Some felt uneasy, others guilty. You can imagine that tension, working for a company everyone says is unstoppable, while quietly suspecting the success might be smoke and mirrors. But here's the thing. The culture around Barry made questioning him nearly impossible. He wasn't just the boss, he was a celebrity. Employees were taught to idolize him, to treat his vision like gospel truth. He had that dangerous mix of charm and intimidation that made people hesitate to challenge him. Keep your head down, enjoy the ride. That was the unspoken rule at ZZZ's best. And for a while, that silence kept the fraud alive. Meanwhile, the workload behind the illusion kept growing. To maintain the company's supposed profitability, Barry had to show ever larger insurance restoration projects. Each one required fake paperwork, phone lines, and photos, not to mention payment records to match. A small lie from 2 years ago now needed a longer lie today to survive tomorrow's audit. It was exponential deceit, and the numbers didn't add up anymore. Remember how Barry once rented buildings for fake site visits? He had to keep doing that, but now on a grander scale. Each tour needed to outshine the last. Investors expected to see progress, not recycled illusions. His team scrambled to design new fake job sites, even at the expense of real cleaning jobs. They were fabricating proofs of success faster than they could clean actual carpets. The scam had become its own full-time business. Eventually, journalists and competitors started to pick up whispers. Some local reporters smelled inconsistencies. The company's rapid growth didn't match the trends in their industry. Established firms didn't see ZZ's best winning the kind of contracts Barry boasted about. When reporters began asking for project addresses or details, Barry dodged questions with his signature confidence and flair. He joked, distracted, and waved them off, and somehow it worked longer than anyone expected. But the truth has this persistent habit of creeping to the surface. The first real blow came when an employee who'd left the company spoke to the press. He didn't give away the full fraud, just mentioned that things didn't quite add up. That small leak opened a floodgate. Journalists dug deeper, cross-referencing job sites Barry had mentioned. Surprise, some of them didn't exist. Others were real buildings, but their owners had never heard of ZZ's best. The fantasy was unraveling, thread by thread. Still, Barry didn't panic. Not yet. His instinct was to go on the offensive, just like he always had. Instead of hiding, he doubled down. Publicly, he accused skeptics of jealousy and insisted that his company was perfectly legitimate. And you know what? Many people believed him. He had spent years perfecting his image, and it paid off. The myth of the young genius still shielded him from serious doubt, but it was only a matter of time. Behind the scenes, though, panic was spreading fast. Barry's closest allies were drowning in paperwork. Fake documents had to be replaced with newer fake documents. The flow of money was starting to jam. Banks wanted clearer proof of assets. Investors demanded updates. And Barry, obsessed with maintaining his persona, was juggling all these fires while appearing on television like everything was fine. It was a surreal dance of denial. Here's where it becomes almost cinematic. The higher the company climbed in valuation, the more holes appeared in its foundation. Think of it like inflating a balloon. It keeps expanding until the surface starts to stretch too thin. One day, a California newspaper published an expose questioning ZZZZ's authenticity. The article was cautious, but enough to stir public suspicion. Suddenly, reporters from other outlets sniffed blood in the water. The story of the teenage millionaire was turning into the story of a possible scammer. Barry, however, saw himself as bulletproof. He went on talk shows defending the company, smiling, deflecting, and talking circles around journalists. He could charm anyone until the facts became too strong. During one interview, a reporter directly asked for proof of a specific insurance restoration project. Barry danced around it but couldn't provide straight evidence. That moment, small as it seemed, planted a very public seed of doubt. Meanwhile, inside the company, the financial strain became unbearable. ZZZZ's profits had been paper profits, money owed on fake projects or imaginary clients. The real cash flow from carpet cleaning wasn't even close to covering expenses, salaries, luxury items, cars, and buildings, all funded by borrowed money and investor funds. The illusion was collapsing under its own weight. Bankers started noticing anomalies in financial records. Payment cycles didn't align. Some clients listed in company reports showed no transactions. Accountants scrambled to fix inconsistencies that couldn't actually be fixed. The more they tried to hide the errors, the more visible they became. It was an accounting nightmare with no exit. And this time, no amount of charisma could write better numbers on the page. As panic spread internally, some employees turned against Barry. Whether out of guilt or self-preservation, a few began cooperating with investigators. Others quietly left before the storm hit. Imagine the tension in those offices. Everyone pretending things were normal while secretly wondering if the FBI would walk in any second. Barry's kingdom of confidence was finally cracking. For the first time, he couldn't control the narrative. Let's stop for a second and think about what this says about corporate systems. Auditors, regulators, investors, all of them had missed the red flags for years. It wasn't until journalists and insider leaks came into play that anyone truly looked closer. This is an uncomfortable truth about business. People rarely investigate success. They only dig into failure. And because Barry looked like a winner, nobody wanted to see what hid underneath. The shift in tone was fast and dramatic. Only months earlier, Barry had been the golden boy of Wall Street. Now TV shows began hinting at deception. Reporters demanded access to contracts, project sites, and insurance records. When insurance companies publicly denied working with ZZZZ, it was game over. Barry's empire of illusion was exposed, and suddenly, everyone wanted to distance themselves from the boy they once called a hero. So what does Barry do when the walls close in? He doesn't run, not immediately at least. He tries to bluff his way out, exactly like he always had. He calls press conferences, denies wrongdoing, accuses detractors of character assassination. It's the classic last act of a fraud. When the truth shows up, try to make it sound like a lie. But this time, the charm didn't land. Investors weren't laughing. They were demanding answers. And answers were exactly what Barry didn't have. As more evidence surfaced, the financial authorities stepped in. Forensic accountants began dissecting ZZZZ's records, tracing money flows that looped through shell companies and dead ends. What they found was staggering. Millions of dollars recycled between accounts to simulate business activity, fake vendor payments, and non-existent job receipts. It wasn't a rogue transaction or an accounting error. It was systematic deception on an industrial scale. Barry had always played the role of a visionary, but now the script was gone. The confident teenager from the suburbs stood face to face with federal investigators asking questions he couldn't dodge. It was all over. The lies, the grandeur, the illusion of control. The media that once praised him turned on him overnight. The story shifted from inspiration to warning, from miracle boy to master manipulator. And deep down, Barry knew there was no way back. In retrospect, maybe there never was a way back. Once you start building success on lies, there's no exit strategy that doesn't end in collapse. The house of cards always falls. The only question is when. ZZZ's Best's fall would soon make headlines worldwide. A corporate tragedy wrapped in teenage ambition. Auditors faced embarrassment. Investors lost millions, and Barry's name became synonymous with deception. But before the full collapse, there was still a flicker of denial. A faint hope that maybe, just maybe, he could talk his way out again. That hope was delusion, of course. The investigations had momentum, the evidence was undeniable, and the myth of ZZ's Best was finished. The fantasy that had once fooled Wall Street, the press, and the public was now cracking wide open. The empire had turned into rubble, and Barry Minkow was standing right in the middle of it, realizing the curtains had finally closed. When the curtain finally fell, it didn't just drop. It crashed down. The empire Barry Minkow had built through endless charm, fake documents, and teenage bravado was in ruins. The young golden boy of Wall Street was now the face of one of the biggest corporate frauds in American history. Investors who once praised him were furious. Auditors were desperate to explain themselves, and Barry, for the first time, had nowhere left to hide. The beginning of the end came when journalists' suspicions transformed into full-blown investigations. They tracked addresses, verified insurance claims, and contacted clients that ZZ's Best had supposedly serviced. One by one, the stories unraveled. At some of the listed sites, owners had never heard of Barry's company. Others confirmed that the supposed restoration work had never taken place. The fantasy empire evaporated in a matter of weeks. Once those articles hit the newsstands, the domino effect began. The stock price collapsed almost overnight. Investors rushed to pull their funds, but there was nothing real left to cash out. The Securities and Exchange Commission swooped in, quickly followed by federal prosecutors. Barry's phones were burning with calls from bankers, investors, and lawyers, all demanding explanations he could no longer fabricate. The boy who once owned the narrative had lost control of his story. For a man who built his career on appearances, the sight of police raiding the ZZZ's Best headquarters was the ultimate humiliation. Cameras rolled as boxes of documents were seized, and employees shuffled out in disbelief. The very media that once placed Barry on magazine covers now turned him into their favorite villain. Every interview, every TV clip, every public appearance he'd ever made now looked like foreshadowing of arrogance before a fall. And Barry, he tried to smile through it, even as the mask cracked wide open. Inside the offices, chaos reigned. Financial records didn't match. Fake accounts were exposed, and investigators followed trails of money looping endlessly between shell companies. It wasn't just one lie, it was thousands, stacked year after year. The fake restoration jobs, the forged paperwork, the staged inspections, it all came crashing down. Barry's closest allies, under pressure, began cooperating with the authorities. What had been loyalty under success turned into survival under prosecution. When federal agents finally arrested Barry, the public didn't know what to think. Was he a criminal mastermind, or just a naive kid who flew too close to the sun? The press painted both pictures. Some viewed him as dangerous, others as tragic. It's strange how quickly society can switch from hero worship to moral outrage. Not long ago, Barry was the American dream come true. Now he was the cautionary tale everyone wanted to moralize about. The trial became a media circus. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, broadcasting every detail of the fall of this once celebrated prodigy. Prosecutors accused him of masterminding a fraud worth over $100 million. That number stunned the public. How could a company run by someone barely old enough to order a drink have pulled off such a massive deception? The answer lay in the perfect storm of greed, gullibility, and unchecked ambition. Barry's story had been too good to question, until it wasn't. In court, Barry's defense tried to paint him as a misguided young man who got lost in success, not a hardened criminal. They argued he never meant to steal, just to buy time until the company truly became as big as he claimed. But the evidence told another story. Forensic accountants traced the money, the forged contracts, and the fake projects. There was no misunderstanding. This was premeditated deceit. It wasn't ambition gone wrong, it was fraud from day one. The testimonies from former employees sealed his fate. Many admitted they had forged documents, faked invoices, and created non-existent job sites on Barry's orders. Some broke down crying on the stand, describing the pressure they felt working under him. It was manipulation cloaked as leadership, and Barry's once magnetic charisma now looked more like control. The boy wonder had become the wolf in designer suits. Every fraud case teaches a different lesson about human. This one showed how easily people can be mesmerized by youth and confidence. The professionals who were supposed to verify ZZZ Best's legitimacy had been blinded by their own ambition and fear of missing out. Auditors ignored inconsistencies. Investors suspended disbelief. In other words, Barry wasn't the only one faking it. Everyone else was too in their own way. They all wanted the dream to be true. When sentencing day arrived, Barry walked in looking more like a movie character than a criminal defendant. He wore an expensive suit and tried to keep that same charming smile that once opened every door for him. But charm doesn't work on judges. The court found him guilty on dozens of counts, from fraud to conspiracy and money laundering. The final sentence, 25 years in federal prison. For a man who built illusions of endless control, the bars snapped the fantasy in two. The impact rippled across corporate America. ZZ's Best wasn't just a company. It had become a symbol of everything wrong with unchecked optimism. The scandal forced auditors to rethink their standards, investors to question their heroes, and regulators to revisit how a teenager could deceive entire institutions. It was no longer just Barry's story. It was a lesson about the fantasy snapped in two. But here's the twist. Barry was still Barry. Even after being sentenced, he couldn't stop selling stories. From prison, he gave interviews, casting himself as a reflective man who had learned from his mistakes. He promised to come back stronger, smarter, more honest. And believe it or not, some people actually believed him again. That's the thing about charm. It doesn't vanish just because the truth has been exposed. Life in prison stripped away the material luxuries, but not Barry's instinct for reinvention. Behind bars, he studied religion, earned degrees, and even started advising law enforcement on how to detect fraud. It's almost poetic, isn't it? The conman turned consultant. He claimed to help others avoid the same mistakes he made, though some wondered if he was just performing another version of redemption to gain attention. Old habits die hard, and Barry's oldest habit was storytelling. Looking back, it's mind-boggling how close Barry came to permanently rewriting reality. If the journalists hadn't pushed deeper, if a few contracts hadn't been exposed, ZZ's Best might have continued expanding. The illusion could have become a giant corporate bubble bursting years later. And maybe that's the scariest part of the whole story. Not that one person could lie, but that so many others were willing to believe him. For every great fraud, there's a moment that defines its downfall. In Barry's case, it wasn't when the police broke down the door, or when he was sentenced. It was the moment he realized his own creation had trapped him. He had invented a success story so perfect, so untouchable, that even he began to believe it. And when you believe your own lie, the crash becomes inevitable. ZZ. Best now exists as nothing more than a cautionary headline in financial history. The buildings are gone, the cars are sold, the illusion erased, but the echoes remain. In business schools, documentaries, and conversations about trust in finance. And Barry, he became a symbol of how ambition without restraint turns brilliance into disaster. The teen genius who fooled Wall Street ended up a convict behind bars. It's poetic justice, delivered by numbers and paper, just like the ones he once forged. Still, Barry's story didn't end there. His journey from celebrity entrepreneur to inmate wasn't the full arc. Years later, he would reinvent himself again, trying to redeem his image while never fully escaping the shadow of ZZ's best. Because here's the truth. Once you've lied at that scale, you're never truly free from your own story. You carry it, like a scar, a reminder, and maybe even a warning to everyone who sees it. This chapter of Barry's life proves something important. Success isn't always about brilliance. Sometimes it's about timing, confidence, and the willingness of others to believe. When those ingredients combine, even fiction can look like fact, until the spotlight burns too hot and the fantasy dissolves. Barry Minkow's fall wasn't just his. It was ours too. A reflection of how easily we mistake performance for proof. It's tempting to close Barry Minkow's story with a single word: fraud. But if you stop there, you miss the deeper lesson, one that reaches far beyond a teenage con artist and into the world we live in today. Because what Barry built wasn't just a fake company. It was a reflection of how ambition, image, and blind trust can collide to create something that feels real even when it isn't. ZZ's best is gone, yes, but the pattern it exposed still repeats itself in boardrooms, startups, and markets around the world. So, what did Barry's spectacular downfall really teach us? Let's start with the obvious. Everyone loves a good success story. People crave inspiration, especially when it comes wrapped in confidence and youth. The idea that a teenager could outsmart the system and rise to millionaire status before turning 21? That's irresistible. But the darker truth is that our obsession with success creates the perfect cover for deceit. When someone tells us what we want to hear, we rarely stop to question if it's actually true. Barry understood that perfectly. He knew that investors, the media, and even banks wanted to believe in him because his story made them feel good about themselves. Supporting a young genius felt like a statement, a vote for hope, innovation, and the promise of the American dream. Nobody wanted to think too hard about the numbers behind it. And that's really the first lesson here. Charisma can blind competence. Confidence often outweighs credibility until reality bursts in. Let's break that down a bit. Charisma is like financial gravity. The stronger it is, the more people it pulls in. Barry's charm turned skepticism into applause. The journalists didn't want to ask tough questions. The auditors didn't want to seem like they were doubting a visionary. Each person who bought into him helped build a chain of misplaced trust. When the chain finally snapped, it didn't just hurt Barry. It financially destroyed hundreds of people and shattered public faith in oversight systems that were supposed to prevent exactly this kind of scam. The second major lesson comes from the institutions themselves. The regulators, auditors, and analysts who failed to catch Barry's scheme weren't all incompetent. Many were complacent. They trusted the process more than they trusted their own eyes. When the numbers looked clean on paper, nobody wanted to dig deeper. It's a phenomenon that shows up again and again in financial crises. People assume someone else has done their homework. Then, when everything collapses, everyone is shocked that it wasn't real. In other words, ZZ's best wasn't just a teenage fantasy gone wrong. It was a systemic failure. The banks were too eager to lend, the accountants too proud to doubt, and the investors too greedy to pause. Together, they built a castle on air, one that looked stunning until the first gust of truth blew through. This is how bubbles form, not just in business, but in society. Hype feeds hype, faith replaces logic, and before long, you've got paper empires waiting to fall. Now maybe you're wondering, could something like this happen again today? The short answer, yes, easily. The tools have changed, but the formula hasn't. Swap the fax machines and fake invoices for apps, stock tokens, or blockchain startups, and you'll see the same ingredients. Big promises, flashy PR, and very little scrutiny. In a digital age where likes and followers often equal credibility, illusion is easier than ever to sell. Barry was a pioneer of perception management. He just played the game decades too early. If you think this sounds cynical, consider the parallels. Every major fraud since then, from dot-com collapses to crypto disasters, follows the blueprint ZZZ's best laid out. The pattern goes like this. Find a revolutionary-sounding idea. Wrap it in irresistible optimism. Collect investors who hate missing out. Then hide behind growth projections instead of actual profits. Eventually, the lie grows faster than reality can keep up. That's when the cracks appear. Sound familiar? It should. But let's not reduce this story to pure condemnation. There's also something deeply human about it. Barry's fraud wasn't born out of hatred or violence. It came from ambition, twisted by insecurity. He wanted to be respected, admired, and remembered. Those desires are universal. What set him apart was his willingness to cross every moral boundary to get there. The scary part is how easy it can be to justify small lies when they're packaged as future success. Once you convince yourself you'll fix it later, you're already lost. Think about your own life, your career, your business, your investments. Have you ever exaggerated a little to make yourself look more successful? Rounded up numbers to impress someone? That's the seed right there. Most people never let it grow into a full con, of course. But the same psychology drives both actions, the belief that perception matters more than truth. Barry didn't invent that idea. He just took it further than anyone else dared to. Then there's the issue of accountability. Many people love to celebrate innovation, but hate taking responsibility when it goes wrong. When ZZ's best imploded, Barry was punished, and rightly so. But many of the adults and institutions around him simply walked away. The bankers, the auditors, the enthusiastic media voices, they moved on to the next headline. Nobody wants to admit they helped inflate a lie. It's a recurring pattern in capitalism. Success has many parents, but failure is always an orphan. Barry himself, though, couldn't escape his legacy. Even after prison, he spent years trying to rebrand himself as a reformed man. He wrote books, gave speeches, even became a pastor for a time. To his credit, he spoke openly about fraud and human weakness, but that hunger for validation never completely disappeared. New scandals followed him later in life, proving that redemption is harder to sustain than reinvention. The man who once fooled the world with fake projects found himself trapped in a lifelong battle with his own shadow. What's fascinating here is how society responded to him over the years. Some saw him as a redeemed soul, others as proof that people rarely change, and maybe both are true. Barry did serve his time. He did own up to his crimes, at least partially. But his story reminds us that character isn't built in apology speeches. It's in the daily decisions between right and easy, and for some people, the spotlight is an addiction they can't quit, even after it burns them. So, how do we prevent another ZZZ best? The answer starts with skepticism, not cynicism, but critical thinking. Anytime a story sounds too perfect, it probably is. Ask questions. Challenge numbers. Dig past the narrative. The truth can survive scrutiny. Lies can't. In finance, as in life, due diligence isn't optional. It's the only firewall between trust and catastrophe. Barry's investors didn't lose because they lacked intelligence. They lost because they mistook momentum for proof. Another key takeaway? Success without transparency is a red flag. Always. A real company welcomes verification because its value can be proven. A fake one avoids light like a vampire. The moment someone discourages questions or hides behind charisma, step back. The same logic applies outside business too. In politics, social media, even personal relationships, the lies that destroy fortunes are usually built the same way as the ones that destroy trust. Slowly, charmingly, and with just enough truth to sound believable. At its core, Barry's story isn't about business. It's about human. We all want to believe in something bigger, a hero, a genius, a miracle. But belief without verification turns hope into risk. And when that hope meets greed, the consequences can be catastrophic. The ZZ's best fraud cost investors millions, but its psychological cost was far greater. It showed that markets don't run on numbers. They run on narratives. And when those narratives rot, the numbers follow. Even decades later, Barry Minkow's rise and fall echoes every time someone gets duped by a polished lie. Every time a too-good-to-be-true startup collapses or a charismatic founder disappears with investor money, we see shades of ZZ's best. The stage changes, the actors change, but the play remains the same. And maybe that's the final lesson. Not just that Barry's fraud was preventable, but that it will happen again if we keep celebrating stories over substance. So, if you take one thing from this saga, let it be this. Brilliance means nothing without integrity, and confidence without truth is just performance. Barry fooled the world because the world wanted to be fooled. And that's the hardest truth of all. The next time someone promises effortless success, exponential growth, or guaranteed profits, pause and ask yourself, is this fact or just another ZZ's best waiting to happen? Because history doesn't repeat by accident. It repeats when we stop paying attention. And if you've made it this far, maybe you'll recognize the next Barry Minkow before his illusion makes the front page. Stay skeptical, stay curious, and remember, even a $100 million lie starts with a single unchecked story.